Episode 1, The Web of Lies. The soft glow of my dual monitors lit up the room as I typed, trying to meet a self-imposed deadline. It was late 11:47 p.m., and while most of the world around me slept, I thrived in these quiet hours. The silence was comforting, only by the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard and the faint hum of the air conditioner. This was my time, my sanctuary. Here, in my home office, I could focus entirely on my work. Outside these four walls, I was a husband, a father, and a son. Inside, I was just Alex, a programmer lost in the infinite possibilities of code. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my stiff shoulders, and let my gaze wander around the room. The walls were lined with reminders of the life I'd built, family photos, awards, and mementos from vacations. There was the photo from Hawaii, where Marissa and I had renewed our vows under a golden sunset. Next to it hung a framed drawing from Lucas, our youngest, showing our family holding hands under a rainbow. On my desk sat a mug emblazoned with the words "World's Best Dad." It had been a Father's Day gift from Thomas, my eldest, 3 years ago. I smiled at the memory of him handing it to me, his face glowing with pride. This was my life, a beautiful wife, 3 wonderful kids, a successful career. It wasn't nothing ever is perfect, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. A sudden burst of laughter broke my train of thought. I paused, hands hovering above the keyboard. The laugh came again, soft and familiar. It was Marissa. She was in the garden, her voice carrying through the open window. I turned my head slightly, listening. It wasn't unusual for her to take late-night calls. As a hospital administrator, her work hours could be unpredictable. But tonight, there was something different about her laugh, something sharp, almost cruel. Curiosity tugged at me, and I stood, moving toward the window. The night air was cool against my face as I looked out. The garden was bathed in soft moonlight, the flowers casting long shadows on the stone pathway. Marissa was pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear. She wore her silk robe, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. It shimmered in the light, a stark contrast to the darkness I felt creeping into my chest. "Can you believe he still has no clue?" she said, her voice cutting through the silence. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. 3 kids, all yours, and he's still paying for private school. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mind struggled to process what she was saying. 3 kids, all yours. Who was she talking to? What did she mean by all yours? I leaned closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass. "Next week?" she continued, her tone playful now. "Yes, I can make that work. Caroline's beach house is perfect this time of year." Caroline, my mother. The realization sent a chill down my spine. Was my mother involved in this? My hands gripped the windowsill, knuckles white with tension. Marissa laughed again, the sound light and carefree. "You always know exactly what to say," she said, her voice soft. "Yes, I'll wear that blue dress you like so much, Bruce." Her tone was intimate, filled with a warmth I hadn't heard in years, but it wasn't meant for me. I stepped back, my legs trembling beneath me. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as my mind raced. Memories began to flood in, each one taking on a new. Bruce Cummins. His name popped into my mind like a spark igniting a fire. Is it him? I wondered. Bruce had been a friend for over a decade, consulting my mother's finances. He was charming, successful, and seemingly harmless. But now, his presence in our lives felt calculated and deliberate. I thought about Thomas, my eldest son, and how his smile mirrored Bruce's in a way I couldn't ignore. Emma's auburn hair was so unlike mine or Marissa's. Lucas's natural talent for numbers, just like Bruce's knack for financial planning. I had laughed off the comments before, the subtle jokes from friends about how my kids didn't look like me. Genetics are funny, I'd say with a chuckle. But now, those words felt like a cruel irony. My knees gave out, and I sank into my chair. My hands trembled as I reached for the mug on my desk, but I couldn't bring myself to drink. The words "World's Best Dad" stared back at me. 15 years of marriage, of love, of trust, all of it was unraveling before my eyes. The sound of footsteps jolted me back to reality. Marissa's voice carried through the hallway, soft and casual, as if nothing had happened. I quickly turned back to my computer, closing the browser and pretending to work. The door creaked open, and there she was, framed by the soft light of the hallway. Her hair was slightly tousled, and she wore the same smile that had once melted my heart. "You're still up?" she asked, her tone warm and familiar. "Don't work too hard, honey." I forced a smile, my heart heavy with the weight of betrayal. "Just finishing up." "Okay." She blew me a kiss, the same way she had 1,000 times before, and closed the door. As her footsteps faded, the smile dropped from my face. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. The pain was grounding, a sharp reminder of the reality I now faced. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed answers, and proof. The morning after that was a blur. The familiar routines of family life, the rush of packing school lunches, the chaotic search for missing shoes, and the cheerful banter over breakfast felt like they belonged to someone else. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, staring blankly at the chaos around me. Thomas and Emma argued over who got the last slice of toast. Lucas, my youngest, sat cross-legged on the floor, meticulously arranging his Lego pieces into a miniature city. Marissa floated effortlessly between the kitchen and dining table, her silk robe replaced by a crisp blouse and skirt. I watched her as she handed Lucas his lunchbox, smoothing his hair with practiced ease. Her every movement was as familiar as it was now alien to me. "Are you okay? I see you look tired," she asked, catching my gaze. Her tone was light, her head tilted slightly in that way she always did when she was genuinely curious. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile, "just tired from working late." She smiled back, her focus already shifting to her next task. The kids finished breakfast and piled into the car, their laughter fading as Marissa drove them to school. I stood in the doorway, waving like I always did, but as soon as they were out of sight, the facade crumbled, my shoulders sagged, and I closed the door with a heavy sigh. I retreated to my office and locked the door, the weight of the previous night pressing down on me. Then, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed, Jared Glover. He was a private investigator, recommended by a colleague years ago during their messy divorce. My thumb hovered over the call button. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I ready to face the truth? I pressed the button. "Hello, this is Jared Glover," a calm, professional voice answered. "My name is Alex Hood," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Mr. Hood, what's up?" His voice was calm, professional, and oddly reassuring. "I need your help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about my wife, and someone else." "Take your time," he replied, "tell me everything." I recounted the events of the previous night, the overheard conversation, the mention of Bruce, the beach house, the kids. Jared listened patiently, asking a few clarifying questions before outlining his plan. "I'll start with the financials and the property records for the beach house," he said. "I'll also look into any patterns of behavior, travel, phone calls, social media activity. We'll piece this together." "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It won't be easy," he warned, "but I'll get you the answers you need." The first report arrived 3 days later, an encrypted email with the subject line, "Initial Findings." My heart pounded as I opened it, my eyes scanning the detailed summary. Jared had started with the beach house, cross-referencing its utility bills and security logs with my travel records. The results were damning. Spikes in water and electricity usage coincided perfectly with my business trips. Attached were photos, grainy but unmistakable, of Marissa's car parked in the driveway. Beside it was Bruce's sleek black Mercedes. The report continued, detailing a series of financial transactions that made my stomach churn. Transfers between accounts I didn't recognize, payments to a private clinic in another state. And then, the most damning evidence, a series of withdrawals marked beneficiaries, that is Bruce. But the worst was yet to come. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed and the house was quiet, I locked myself in my office with Jared's report. My hands trembled as I opened the final attachment, a detailed timeline of Marissa and Bruce's interactions. It began innocently enough, meetings at my mother's request, social gatherings, family holidays, but as I scrolled through the timeline, the entries became more frequent and more intimate. Weekend trips, late-night phone calls, rendezvous disguised as emergencies. My breath caught when I reached the last entry. Bruce ordered a DNA test shortly after Lucas was born. The results were undeniable. Lucas, my sweet, innocent boy, wasn't mine. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as tears filled my eyes. Lucas, who idolized me, spent hours building Lego cities and drawing pictures of us as superheroes. My hands clenched, my nails digging into my palms. This wasn't his fault. He was as much a victim as I was. I thought of Thomas and Emma. Were they Bruce's too? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I had to know. The next morning, I called Jared. I need you to dig deeper, I said, my voice cold and steady. I'll expand the investigation, he replied, but you need to be prepared for what we might find. Prepared? How could I prepare for the unraveling of my entire life? As the days passed, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. I helped Thomas with his homework, cheered Emma on at her violin recital, and built yet another Lego masterpiece with Lucas. But every smile, every laugh, felt like a lie. Marissa, oblivious to my turmoil, carried on as if nothing had changed. She kissed me goodnight, asked about my day, and planned our next family vacation. But I couldn't look at her without seeing the betrayal. Every word she spoke, every touch, all heartache. A week later, Jared called with an update. I've traced the financial transactions to a joint account shared by your mother and Bruce, he said. It seems she's been funneling money to support Marissa and Bruce's activities. My stomach turned. My mother, the woman who had raised me, who had taught me the value of honesty and integrity, was complicit in this nightmare. Jared's next words sent a chill down my spine. I've also uncovered emails between your mother and Marissa, dating back to before your wedding, he said. It looks like your mother orchestrated the entire relationship. I sat in stunned silence as Jared read excerpts from the emails. Caroline had seen Bruce as the better match for Marissa but had encouraged the marriage to me for stability. She wanted you as the financial and emotional anchor, Jared said, but Bruce was always part of the equation. I ended the call and stared at the blank wall in front of me. My mind raced, replaying every memory, every interaction with my mother, Marissa, and Bruce. The love, the trust, the family I had built, it was all a lie. But this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. I wasn't just a victim in their twisted game. I was a father, and I had 3 kids who needed me no matter whose blood ran in their veins. I would uncover the truth. The air felt heavier as I sat in my office, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. Jared's latest report was open, and the words seemed to jump off the page, screaming truths I didn't want to accept. My mother, the matriarch of our family, had orchestrated this deception from the very beginning. Emails dating back years revealed her careful planning. In one message, she had written to Marissa, Bruce is the better choice, dear, but Alex is stable and dependable. This way, you can have everything. Everything? The word echoed in my mind. She had great with my life, arranging my marriage to serve her twisted sense of what was best for me. I felt a mix of anger and devastation. The betrayal wasn't just from Marissa or Bruce, it was from the woman who had raised me, who I thought had always wanted the best for me. But the worst part? She had succeeded. For 15 years, I had been her pawn, oblivious to the game she was playing. I needed air. Leaving the house, I drove aimlessly through the streets of Millbrook. Familiar landmarks blurred past as my mind raced. Every memory, every moment I had cherished now felt tainted. I found myself at the edge of Millbrook Park, a quiet retreat with winding paths and a small pond. Parking the car, I stepped out and let the cool breeze wash over me. The sound of rustling leaves and distant laughter from children playing offered a brief reprieve from the storm in my head. But it wasn't enough. Pulling out my phone, I called Jared. Glover, he answered. I need to meet, I said, my voice firm. Today. There was a pause. I can be at the coffee shop on Elm in 30 minutes. I'll see you there. The coffee shop was small, tucked away on a quiet street. Its warm, inviting interior was a stark contrast to the cold reality I was living. When I arrived, Jared was already seated, with a cup of black coffee in front of him and a tablet resting on the table. Mr. Hood, he greeted, standing to shake my hand. Alex, I corrected, sitting across from him. What's next we do? Jared slid his tablet toward me. On the screen, a detailed flowchart mapped out every connection and piece of evidence he had uncovered. We've got enough to prove infidelity, he began, not just the affair with Bruce, but the financial misconduct tied to your mother. If this goes to court, you'll have a strong case for divorce and financial restitution. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. What about the kids? I asked. My voice softened, the weight of the question pressing on my chest. They're innocent in all of this. Jared's expression softened. We can protect them. The evidence I've gathered focuses on the adults involved. The children don't need to be part of this unless you want to pursue custody. Custody. The word hung in the air. They weren't biologically mine, but I had raised them and loved them. I treat them like my children. That didn't change a DNA test. I'll think about it, I said finally. Jared leaned back, studying me. Please think, considering. Driving home, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The pain was still there, raw and unrelenting, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it fueled something inside me, a need to take control, to reclaim the narrative of my life. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. Marissa was in the kitchen, sipping a glass of tea and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "You're home early," she said, setting the glass down. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Meeting ended sooner than I expected." She nodded, her attention drifting back to her phone. I stood there for a moment, watching her. She looked so normal, so comfortable. It was infuriating. "I'm going to my office," I said, turning before she could respond. Once inside, I locked the door and sat down at my desk. The weight of everything pressed down on me, but I knew I couldn't let it break me. I opened my laptop and began making notes, details about finances, properties, and the timeline of events Jared had provided. My goal wasn't just to confront Marissa or Bruce. It was bigger than that. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. That night, as I lay in bed next to Marissa, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her breathing was steady and peaceful, as if she had no idea her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. I thought about the kids, about how this would affect them. Thomas was 13, Emma was 11, and Lucas was 9. They deserved better than this. But I couldn't let this lie continue. They deserved the truth, even if it hurt. I made a silent promise to myself, I would protect them, no matter what. The next morning, as the kids rushed off to school and Marissa left for work, I made my way back to the coffee shop to meet Jared. "Let's finalize the plan," I said as soon as I sat down. Jared nodded. "We'll start with securing your assets. Once that's done, we can initiate the divorce proceedings and present the evidence." "Good," I said, my voice firm. "We'll ensure children are provided for," he said. "Their trust funds will be untouchable, and we can set up safeguards to protect their future." I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Jared," I said. He nodded. "This is just the beginning. Alex, stay strong. If you found out your children weren't biologically yours, would it change the way you feel about them? How would you handle the situation? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts." Episode 2, The Unraveling Truth. The morning after my meeting with Jared began as any other. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as I stood by the counter, gripping a cup of coffee tighter than necessary. The rich aroma filled the air, but the usual comfort it brought me was nowhere to be found. Marissa was busy packing lunches for the kids, moving effortlessly between the fridge and the counter, her phone balanced precariously on her shoulder. "This is Thomas's," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "Emma needs an extra snack for her rehearsal." Her voice faded into the background as I watched her, the facade of normalcy only fueling the storm inside me. How could she act so casually, so confidently, while I now knew the extent of her betrayal? Moments later, the kids came bounding down the stairs, filling the room with their usual chaotic energy. When she was getting ready to take the kids to school, she kissed me on the cheek, a fleeting touch that felt hollow. She said as she grabbed her keys, "I'll be home late tonight. I have a big meeting with the board." "Okay," I replied, watching as she left, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. As the door closed behind her, the facade I had maintained crumbled. I exhaled deeply, leaning against the counter. The silence of the empty house pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I made my way to my office, closing the door behind me. Later that morning, I met with Jared at a small coffee shop tucked away on the edge of town. The warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the cold reality we were discussing. Jared slid a folder across the table, his expression unreadable. "This is everything we have so far." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the documents inside. Surveillance photos, financial statements, and communication logs filled the pages, each piece fitting together to form a picture I wished I could unsee. "The messages between Marissa and Bruce are encrypted, but we've identified patterns," Jared began, his voice steady. "They've been meeting regularly, hotels, private dinners, and Most recently, a boutique hotel near the outskirts of town. He pointed to a photo of the hotel, its modest exterior betraying the secrets it housed. She's booked a room there tomorrow night. Bruce has the adjoining room, under an alias. Good, I said, my voice cold. Alex, Jared began cautiously, you need to be prepared. Seeing this in person will be different. It's one thing to suspect, it's another to know. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I'll be ready. That evening, I sat in the living room with the kids, helping Lucas with his math homework while Emma practiced her violin in the background. Thomas was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel the normalcy of family life. The love I had for my children was unshaken, even as the foundation of our family crumbled beneath us. As I tucked Lucas into bed that night, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes. Dad? Yes, buddy? Are we going to the park this weekend? You promised. I hesitated, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. I wouldn't miss it. His face lit up, and he hugged me tightly. You're the best dad ever. I left his room with tears in my eyes, the truth cutting deeper than ever. No matter what the DNA said, I was their father, and I would fight to protect them. The next morning, I arrived at the hotel Jared had mentioned. I parked a few blocks away, my heart pounding in my chest as I walked toward the entrance. Jared had arranged for a surveillance team to be stationed discreetly inside, ensuring we wouldn't miss anything. The lobby was quiet, its minimalist design giving it an air of sophistication. I spotted Jared near the elevator, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. They're here, he said, handing me a small earpiece, room 314 and 315. I nodded, slipping the earpiece into place as we made our way to the observation room. The monitors displayed live feeds from the hidden cameras Jared's team had installed earlier that day. The first screen showed Marissa entering room 314, her expression calm, as if this were just another day. The second screen revealed Bruce arriving shortly after, slipping into room 315 with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. Jared's voice broke the silence. Do you want to listen in? My throat tightened, but I nodded. He adjusted the audio feed, and their voices filled the small room. Did you transfer the funds? Marissa's voice was sharp, businesslike. Everything's set, Bruce replied. We'll finalize the next steps after this weekend. And Alex? She asked. He's been acting strange lately. Let him, Bruce said dismissively. He doesn't have the guts to do anything. Besides, by the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. I clenched my fists, the rage bubbling beneath the surface. Jared placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. Stay focused, he said. We're almost there. The rest of the meeting was a blur of coded language and vague references to their plans, but it was enough. Jared's team captured everything, the voices, the interactions, the undeniable proof of their betrayal. As I left the hotel that day, the weight of the evidence pressed down on me. This was no longer about uncovering the truth. It was about what came next. The next day, the morning light filtered through the curtains of my office as I sat at my desk, staring at the mountain of evidence Jared had compiled. The videos, the financial records, the emails, it was all there, laid out in brutal clarity. Marissa and Bruce weren't just having an affair. They were orchestrating a calculated attempt to strip me of everything I had built. And my own mother? Her involvement was the cruelest betrayal of all. The weight of it pressed down on me, but I couldn't afford to falter. This wasn't the time for grief or anger, it was the time for action. Later that morning, I met Jared at his office. His team had been working around the clock to uncover the full plan of Bruce and Marissa's schemes. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee, and Jared's desk was cluttered with papers, evidence of his relentless dedication. We've made significant progress, he said, handing me a folder. The offshore accounts are connected to shell companies Bruce set up years ago. He's been siphoning money and funneling it through these companies to finance his ventures. I flipped through the documents, my stomach churning as I read the details. Transactions spanning years, all carefully hidden under layers of corporate jargon and false accounts. Marissa's name appeared repeatedly, along with my mother's, confirming their active roles in the scheme. Why? I asked, my voice low but steady. What's the endgame? Jared leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. It's about control. Bruce and your mother see you as a means to an end, a way to access resources and maintain influence. Marissa, she's complicit, but she's also benefiting from their plans. they're using you as their foundation. His words stung, but they also ignited a fire within me. How do we stop them? Jared straightened, his demeanor shifting to one of determination. We ask for help, freeze the accounts, secure your assets, and gather enough evidence to ensure they can't retaliate. But we need to be strategic. If we act too soon, they'll have time to cover their tracks. I nodded, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. Let's do it. Over the next few days, I worked closely with Jared's team to prepare for the next phase of our plan. Every step had to be calculated, every move precise. Jared coordinated with legal experts to draft motions to freeze the offshore accounts while I focused on securing my finances. At home, I maintained the facade of normalcy, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Marissa's behavior had started to change. She was more cautious and more guarded. She spent hours on her phone, her conversations hushed. The tension between us was palpable, an unspoken acknowledgement of the unraveling truth. 2 days later, Jared called with an update. We've found another connection, he said, his tone urgent. Bruce has been using a property owned by your mother to hold meetings with potential investors. It's not just about the money, they're building something bigger. What kind of meetings? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. Private ones, Jared replied. We've identified several high-profile names in his network. This isn't just about your family, it's about influence and power. His words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a calculated plan for everything I stood for. What's our next step? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. We need concrete evidence of their meetings, Jared said. If we can prove that Bruce and your mother are using your assets for these ventures, we'll have a solid case. The next evening, I found myself parked outside the property Jared had mentioned. It was a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, surrounded by tall hedges and an iron gate. Jared's team had set up surveillance earlier in the day, and I was there to observe the activity firsthand. Through the binoculars, I watched as cars arrived, one by one. Each vehicle was sleek, expensive, and exuded the kind of wealth and power Bruce seemed to thrive on. Guests were greeted by Bruce himself, his demeanor confident and charismatic. Among the guests was my mother. She stepped out of her car, her posture as poised as ever, and greeted Bruce with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. Seeing her there, so deeply entrenched in Bruce's schemes, solidified my resolve. Jared's voice crackled through the earpiece. We've got everything we need on camera. This is enough to connect the dots. I exhaled slowly, my emotions a volatile mix of anger, betrayal, and determination. Good, let's wrap this up. The following day, I met Jared at his office to finalize our next steps. The evidence we had gathered was damning, enough to dismantle Bruce's network and expose my mother's involvement. But the hardest part was yet to come, confronting Marissa. She knows something's wrong, I said, pacing the room. I can see it in the way she looks at me. She's getting nervous. Jared replied, but she doesn't know how much you've uncovered. Use that to your advantage. I nodded, the weight of the plan settling heavily on my shoulders. When this is over, I need to know my kids will be okay. They will be, Jared said firmly. His reassurance brought a small measure of comfort, but it wasn't enough to quell the storm inside me. That evening, I sat in the living room with the kids, helping Lucas with his homework while Thomas and Emma played a board game nearby. Their laughter and chatter filled the room, a bittersweet reminder of what I was fighting to protect. As I tucked Lucas into bed later that night, he looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. Dad, are you mad at Mom? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Why do you ask that, buddy? I said gently. Because you don't smile as much anymore, he said simply, and sometimes you look sad. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my heart breaking at his innocence. I'm not mad at Mom, I said finally. I just have a lot on my mind, but I promise everything will be okay. He nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer, and snuggled under the covers. As I left his room, I felt a renewed sense of determination. No matter what happened, I would protect them from the fallout. Jared called early the next morning. His tone was sharp and focused, a man ready for the next phase. We've finalized everything, he said. The accounts are secured, and the legal documents are in place. Bruce and your mother have no idea what's coming. Good, I replied, but before we go public, I want to make this personal. They need to understand the gravity of what they've done, and I want everyone to see them for who they really are. Jared hesitated, You're planning a confrontation? Yes, I said firmly. At the Thanksgiving dinner, everyone will be there: Marissa, Bruce, my mother, the entire family and close friends. It's the perfect stage. That's risky, Jared warned. If they realize you're about to expose them, they might retaliate or try to twist the narrative. I'll control the narrative, I said, my voice cold. This ends on my terms. The days leading up to Thanksgiving felt like walking a tightrope. The tension in the house was palpable, yet unspoken. Marissa avoided me whenever possible. Her conversations curt and rehearsed. The kids, thankfully, seemed oblivious, their excitement for the holiday masking the cracks forming beneath the surface. I spent those days carefully laying the groundwork for what was to come. Jared and his team worked tirelessly, compiling the evidence into a presentation so airtight that not even Bruce or my mother could talk their way out of it. The documents, photos, and transcripts were neatly organized into a folder, ready to be revealed when the time was right. This confrontation wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about reclaiming control. For too long, I had allowed Marissa, Bruce, and my mother to manipulate me. That ended now. On the morning of Thanksgiving, I woke up early, the quiet anticipation of the day pressing down on me. The house was still, save for the faint sound of Lucas stirring in his room. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the dining table, staring at the folder in front of me. This was it. Everything I had uncovered, the lies, the betrayal, the calculated deception, was contained within those pages. It was both a weapon and a shield, a tool to dismantle the facade they had built. Marissa entered the kitchen a short while later, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She hesitated when she saw me, her eyes flickering to the folder before quickly looking away. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said, her voice forced. "Happy Thanksgiving," I replied, my tone neutral. She busied herself with preparing breakfast, the clatter of pans filling the silence between us. By mid-morning, the house was buzzing with activity. The kids were running around, excitedly talking about the relatives and friends who would soon arrive. Marissa was in full hostess mode, her movements efficient as she coordinated the final preparations for dinner. By mid-morning, the house buzzed with activity. Marissa was in the kitchen, preparing the turkey and side dishes with the precision of someone to maintain control. The kids ran through the house, their laughter a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Did you pick up the wine?" she asked as I entered the kitchen. "It's in the car," I replied. "Good," she said, her voice clipped. "And the extra chairs? Did you set them up in the dining room?" "Not yet," I said. "I'll take care of it." She gave me a tight nod before turning back to the stove. Her attempts to maintain normalcy were almost impressive, but I could see through the cracks. By afternoon, the guests began to arrive. My mother was one of the first, her presence commanding as always. She swept into the house, her smile radiant as she greeted the kids and complimented Marissa on the decor. "Everything looks wonderful, darling," she said, kissing Marissa on the cheek. "Thank you, Caroline," Marissa replied, her voice tight. I watched them from across the room, my stomach churning at their shared complicity. Bruce arrived shortly after, his demeanor as smug as ever. He greeted everyone with his usual charm. He strolled into the house with an expensive gift in his hand, greeting everyone with the kind of charm that had always made me uneasy. "Alex," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "How are you, my friend?" I forced a smile, my jaw tightening. "Never better." He chuckled, oblivious to the venom in my tone, and turned his attention to Marissa. The exchange between them was brief but telling: a quick glance, a slight nod, a flicker of something unspoken. I clenched my fists, the anger simmering beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. Tonight wasn't about impulse, it was about strategy. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay composed. Tonight, their mask would finally slip. Dinner was served in the dining room, the long table adorned with candles and an abundance of food. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses, but beneath it all, I could feel the tension building. I moved through the crowd, exchanging polite small talk while keeping a watchful eye on Marissa, Bruce, and my mother. They were careful, their interactions minimal, but I could see the unease in their body language. Dinner was a grand affair, the dining table laden with turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and an array of side dishes. Marissa had outdone herself, her perfectionism evident in every detail. The guests oohed and awed over the spread, their compliments a small balm to her frayed nerves. I sat at the head of the table, the folder resting on the chair beside me, hidden but within reach. My heart pounded as I picked at my plate, the weight of what was to come pressing down on me. The conversation flowed easily at first, the usual holiday topics of gratitude and family filling the air, but as the meal progressed, the atmosphere shifted. I could see it in the way Marissa avoided my gaze, in the way Bruce's laughter sounded a little too forced, in the way my mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. They were waiting, anticipating,